What are pointers for? Okay, well, there's three main things that pointers are used for, and they are the following. You may not understand the third one, but don't worry, we'll get to that. Recall that functions, all the functions that we used in the past, have not been able to modify their parameters and have those modifications be reflected back in the equivalent variable in the place where the function was called from. What am I talking about? Well, cast your mind back to that function that we wrote called double_it, and you pass in an integer, and the double_it function simply multiplies that parameter by 2. However, back in the main, where double_it was called from, the corresponding variable that was passed in does not get doubled. Only the copy gets doubled. Okay, is this making sense now? When you pass a parameter into a function, you're actually creating a duplicate of that variable. The parameter is a duplicate of the original variable. So when the parameter gets doubled, only the duplicate is getting doubled. The original is not getting doubled. Okay, so now I don't expect you to understand how, but when you use pointers in conjunction with function parameters, you can actually end up with a function that can modify the original. We're not creating a duplicate, we're actually working on the original. So if the double_it function was modified to use pointers, it could successfully double the integer that was passed into it. And the main could end up, or the integer that was passed in from main could actually be successfully doubled. Now that is a very useful thing to be able to do. Create a function that can modify its parameters. So we'll have a look at that in this chapter. Secondly, pointers can help us passing structures around from one function to another, using structures as function parameters. Now, we already can do that. We can already pass structures around as function parameters. However, you probably don't know this, but when you do that, when you pass a structure from one function to another, it is actually quite a slow process and can consume a lot of memory. It depends on the size of the structure. We'll talk about that later in this chapter. But if you can do the same thing using a pointer, the passing of the structure is much faster and uses much less memory. So we end up with a much more efficient program. So that's the second thing that pointers can help us with. Thirdly, they can help us with dynamic memory allocation. In fact, we couldn't do dynamic memory allocation if we didn't have pointers. Now, you don't know what dynamic memory allocation is yet, but you will, because we have a chapter just devoted to dynamic memory. So we'll get to that. So those are the three reasons, the three main reasons that we have pointers. And they're all extremely powerful reasons. And the C programming language would be at a significant loss if pointers were to be taken out of it. So that pretty much concludes the discussion of pointers. We've seen what they are, we've seen what they're for, and we've seen a little bit about how they're used. I'll now go and focus a little bit more strongly on how they're used. I'm going to actually take us now into the code, and we'll see some coded examples of pointers.